Story 1. Call in sick. Inform them that you are unable to serve in the military because you identify as a different gender. Story 2. If it is the defense of my homeland, and by extension my own land and my family, I would not attempt to avoid it. If it were for a moral and just war, I would not try to evade it. In both cases, I would volunteer. If I felt it was a morally unjust war, I would stand my ground on my property and wait for them to come to bring me in. Story 3. As a Canadian, there is only one country that has openly threatened our sovereignty. You might be surprised at how many citizens would not need to be conscripted. Story 4. I'm not sure I would try to get out of it. That said, I would likely be dismissed due to a genetic condition I have. The military does not want a soldier who could have a spontaneous aortic dissection at any time. Story 5. If it is the United States, it would likely be difficult if you did not flee the entire country. Many medical issues were ignored during the Vietnam War because they needed soldiers for the front lines. Consequently, the Vietnam War has made it politically risky to activate the draft in the United States. To be fair, with many of the policies being enacted, there will be many desperate people willing to sign up. Story 6. Laws in my country prevent me from being conscripted as a soldier, as I am a conscientious objector. I completed mandatory service for the Red Cross instead of the military, allowing me to work in a civilian or military hospital in case of war. However, I am also just above the age where I would be called in unless there is extreme desperation. Story 7. My medical conditions require medication to keep me alive, and needing them daily would cost more than my value on the battlefield. Story 8. Present the extensive list of illnesses and disabilities that my country has recognized I suffer from. Story 9. 3 shattered vertebrae, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, brittle bones, and a recent colon cancer scare. Oh, and I am 60 years old. Let's not forget my bone spurs. Story 10. I am 45 years old. Conscription eligibility ends before the age of 40, so it is not likely. However, if there are invaders inside our borders, I would serve. Story 11. Be untrainable and ineffective. Make mistakes consistently, disrupt group activities, and strive to be as incompetent as possible. As a Navy veteran, I can say that some individuals end up being far more costly to leadership than they contribute to productivity, which slows everything to a crawl. Told to mop a floor? Oops, the bucket fell and spilled everywhere. Oh no, we weren't supposed to pour the entire bottle of cleaner into the water. That makes it very slippery and difficult to clean up, and now we don't have any cleaner. That's unfortunate. Story 12. I am a 40-year-old woman with asthma and poor ankle health. For me to be conscripted in the first place, the situation would have to be dire. Story 13. I would tell them I'm old, I'm bisexual, I'm a liberal Democrat, and I dislike Donald Trump. All of which is true. Story 14. Join and become a cook, mechanic, or office worker. Learn how to fly a drone or work as a guard who allows people on base or keeps them out. There are military post offices and opportunities to drive a military bus. Story 15. I have already served in the military and I am considered completely disabled by them. If I am drafted, we are in trouble. However, I am also an engineer and I would likely be placed in a technical advisory role, so I would probably cope with it and just go along with it. Story 16. I'm American. It depends on what we are doing. Would we be defending the mainland from an attack by China? I probably wouldn't try to get out. Are we defending ourselves from a Mexican invasion? Story 17. Not a United States citizen. If there were a war, it would be Russia attacking us again. I am old, small, and a woman, but one must do what needs to be done so my nieces and nephews have a world to live in. Story 18. In this country, as a woman, all I have to do is tell them I am on my period, and they become uncomfortable and let me go. Story 19. I will not participate. The only situation in which I would consider joining an army is if my country is being invaded. I refuse to fight a war for wealthy individuals around the world for their profits. Story 20. Many people here are posting that they are old or have disqualifying medical conditions. I'm almost 61, have already served 6 years in the United States Navy, and I am in pretty good shape for my age and how I've treated my body with only one total knee replacement. However, I feel that if Trump wanted his own infantry, he would throw us all into it, just like his father figure, Putin. Story 21. My country has spent the last 20 years telling me, as a white straight male, that I'm the problem. Therefore, I'll just refuse and go to jail. Story 22. I'm old, but I'm not sure that would stop the current administration. At least I could provide comfort to the 14-year-olds who were already assigned jobs in southern states. Story 23. I would likely end up being dismissed for medical reasons. If not, I hope to continue my career path but work for the military instead of being on the front lines. Story 24. I grew up Mennonite, a peace church. They and the Quakers are the original conscientious objectors. Who is to say I am not still devout? Story 25. By being sickly and suffering from cancer, or I might just go to the ski resort and break something significant. Story 26. 1. Take care of my dental health because I hear that it will, at the very least, delay things. I have to get all 4 wisdom teeth removed, and I want to take advantage of fixing my crossbite to delay it even further. I'm not sure, but I believe that thoracic outlet syndrome would disqualify me. Story 27. I wouldn't try to get out of it. At 62 years old, I would again re-enlist in the United States Air Force. If it meant taking out the garbage from the White House, I'm in. Story 28. I am too old, but I would rather die than go to jail or war for Trump and his deceitful associates. Story 29. Immediately register for technical college courses. You can usually defer or be exempt from drafts if you are in college or school, and technical colleges are affordable and accessible to nearly everyone, so it should be straightforward, assuming you have time. Story 30. I'm too old. I think it would be better to focus on computer-related work. I also work in an industry that was considered essential during COVID, so perhaps they will allow us to continue our jobs. Story 31. I am almost blind, so I was exempted from military service for that reason. However, I have no issue serving as a machine gunner or in a role where excellent vision is not required. Story 32. I am likely their ideal candidate. I am physically fit enough to handle most tasks, skilled with firearms, and I have reached a point in my life where I am at peace with my mortality. Being given the opportunity to contribute to the future of my country feels meaningful and honorable. Who are we fighting? Story 33. I weigh 20 pounds less than the normal range and have several mental health conditions, along with little tolerance for people showing off unearned authority. I'm either medicated or facing disciplinary action before I complete basic training. Story 34. No one is giving me a firearm. I experience too many episodes of self-harm. I am more likely to harm myself than face the enemy. Story 35. Too old. Disqualifying medical conditions. Fully retired years ago after a decades-long military career. Choose one. Story 36. I've already done my time. They can call me as much as they want. I'll just answer, new number? Who is this? Story 37. I am living with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and have ingrown toenails that often prevent me from being active for long periods. If all else fails, even though I think it is a foolish reason to go to war, I will hit the road and escape. I will repaint my car, use a fake license plate, and move around rural towns working odd jobs under the table. I will find a way. Story 38. I had a great-grandfather in Arkansas who was a minister. When the Civil War broke out, he moved to a cave and made leather-bound Bibles to provide money for his family to survive during the war because he was a pacifist. He survived. Story 39. I am medically disqualified, but I would still like to join. However, I am a single father and my enemy would be the United States. Canada has limited military capabilities, and it would likely be the shortest war in history. Story 40. If a millionaire in Washington starts a war and expects me to fight for his mistakes, that's a personal problem between us. But if it is another Russian invasion, we won't need to talk. I will already be on the front line. Story 41. I am forfeit on a number of counts. They wouldn't accept my physically fit son when he tried to volunteer after September 11th because of his scoliosis. That's only one of the ailments I have, not to mention I am 2 weeks from turning 66. They would reject me even if I volunteered. They would reject me faster than if my name were Steve Rogers before the serum. Story 42. I am a 75 combat veteran, 100% disabled, but I can still shoot. Since your mind can take you places your body may not want to go, I would volunteer because some of you are worth it. Story 43. They wouldn't take me into the Navy right out of high school when I wanted to join, so it's frustrating that they would waive the requirements now that I am 37 and productive. Story 44. I live on the other side of the globe and have been for a long time. If I needed my country to actually help me, I would be doomed. I don't think they would care much. Story 45. If I am being drafted at 40 years old, I suppose I am going because there isn't much time left before we are all gone. At least I might gain access to better equipment than I currently have. Story 46. The tried and true way is to say I have bone spurs, flat feet, and am blind and nearsighted. I also cannot hear out of my right ear. Story 47. Flee the country. I do not care what the reason for the war is. There is no circumstance that would convince me to be sent across the world to kill other human beings. I have more dignity than that. Story 48. Disability and general frailness. I would be highly unlikely to meet their physical standards, so unless they really want a hard-of-hearing community college graduate with a long list of chronic health issues as an engineer, I think I am probably fine. Story 49. I wouldn't think it's too hard if you want to get out of it so badly that you're willing to set aside honor and shame. For instance, Ted Nugent experienced a moment of fear before he went in. Story 50. The Selective Service System states that certain civilian jobs are considered essential for national security and welfare, and individuals in these roles are often exempt from the draft. I have one of those jobs. Story 51. I believe I would be rejected on multiple medical grounds. However, since I am Canadian, if I were to be conscripted right now, the causes I can imagine Canada getting involved in are ones that I support, and I would not try to avoid it. Story 52. It depends. If it's legitimate, I will go. I chose not to join the military, but I would serve if called. Men half my age did it for World War II. I would step up and do my part. If it is a political stunt like invading Canada to satisfy someone's ego, I would choose prison. I believe the men half my age who served in World War II would have done the same, considering they believed in what this country was meant to be. Story 53. They discharged me once because I broke my foot, and it didn't heal properly. I don't think they want me back unless they are seriously desperate. Story 54. I have disabilities that would exempt me from service. Unlike others, I actually have bone spurs on both heels. I also have plantar fasciitis and hallux rigidus in my toes, making running and marching difficult for me. If they want me that badly, they should pay for the surgeries to fix my feet. Story 55. I wouldn't try to avoid it. Though my body is likely too old and worn for active combat duty, with my training and experience, I am confident the military could put me to work somewhere very useful in engineering, maintenance, transport, or logistics. Story 56. Medically retired from the United States Army about 40 years ago. I am too old and not physically capable of being a soldier. Story 57. Age 73, partially crippled with arthritis, a heart condition, and epilepsy. I am very doubtful I would get conscripted. It is better to die at home than in some foreign land. Hopefully, those with extreme political views will not lead to a global conflict. Story 58. Since I was deaf for the first 3 years of my life, I have hearing issues. Unfortunately, I have both hyperactivity disorder and attention deficit disorder, as well as a learning disability with natural languages and a speech impediment. Additionally, I have a heart murmur. I believe all of these medical conditions disqualify me from serving. Furthermore, at 48 years old, I may be considered too old. Story 59. I am older and wear glasses and hearing aids. I would likely be a liability in the field. However, I could still do support work, which would free up a younger soldier to focus on tasks I cannot perform. Story 60. I am overweight and older. However, even if I were younger, I believe they appreciate my skills as a nurse rather than in a combat role. Story 61. Here's my perspective. I have no problem defending my country, but I'm not going first. I don't possess anything of significant value, I hold no power or influence, and I am not extremely wealthy. In my opinion, if an urgent need arises that requires the defense of the country, those with the most to lose should go first. They can take the lead, and then I'll step in if things do not go well. I don't care what anyone says. I'm not taking action until the prominent figures show their commitment first. Then I'll be fully supportive. Story 62. I would tell them that I am a transgender person with gender dysphoria. Apparently, those individuals are no longer permitted in the military in my country. Story 63. I am fully leaving the country and never looking back. I am not willing to sacrifice for these individuals, and I know that many of my fellow citizens feel the same way. This is also the reason why a certain nation is struggling. Story 64. I would argue that I would be more useful to the war effort by continuing to work in the factory. If they did not accept that, I would join. Story 65. I am experiencing serious mental issues and may hold up the rifle while pointing it at my comrades. Story 66. Depends on what kind of war it is, like the American War for freedom, which often translates to wanting access to oil and the destruction of democratic governments. I hope to find a way to avoid it. Defending my homeland, where I grew up, from an aggressor is something I might willingly do, even knowing it could be a death sentence. However, I would be open to exploring every possible option to defend against or stop aggression. To be honest, fighting against the rise of fascism and authoritarian movements, including in my own country, is beginning to feel like a war. It depends on your definition of war and what counts as being in one. Perhaps we are already in a state of war, and if everyone is at war, good luck trying to escape it. It's not just about conscription. If you lose a brother, friend, son, or father, whether or not you are drafted, even if it occurs in another country, you are still part of the conflict. In my humble opinion, there is no real way to get out of it. Story 67. I work in an industry that is vital for the war effort. I don't want to disclose my identity, but my workplace is likely a strategic target for an invading army. It would probably be bombed before a conscription notice was issued. Story 68. I am twice the normal conscription age and very out of shape. There is little chance I would be conscripted. Story 69. As a joke, I would say bone spurs. It makes it appear 3 times. As for me, I would not try to get out. They denied me when I tried to get in. I scored 96 on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, coming from a military family and signing out. Story 70. A diagnosis of bone spurs may lead to being unfit for service, or one may take a sexual interest in their own gender. Story 71. Even though I have legitimate reasons, I would not be allowed. I may consider it for a quick end. No guilt. No more pain. Story 72. I used drugs when I was enlisted and attempted suicide. During my 1.25 years in the military, 2 months were spent in a psychiatric setting. I don't think they are going to reverse the General Honor and RE4B reenlistment code. If they do, there's new scar tissue. For the record, I feel terrible about all that, and I respectfully disposed of my uniforms. Story 73. Certain medical conditions will exempt you from service. You may be eligible for a religious or educational deferment. Story 74. I wouldn't try to avoid it. The most likely enemies these days are Russians, Americans, or Chinese. None have a particularly good track record for how they treat civilians. I would prefer to have a rifle. Story 75. I am on disability for mental health reasons, including manic bipolar depression, generalized anxiety, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Additionally, I have 2 felonies, which means I would likely not be accepted even if I were drafted. Although I like to imagine myself as a member of elite special forces, such as Delta Force or Navy SEALs, that is probably not going to happen outside my daydreams. Story 76. I was in the military before, and when I left, I was overweight by their standards and barely passed physical tests, especially those that included running. That was 5 years of Mountain Dew, pizza, and being inactive. Story 77. I would be exempted as a student, and once graduated, I would be considered too qualified for military service. If that fails, I would point out medical issues and assert my position as a conscientious objector. However, realistically, if my country is invaded, I would leave. Given the geopolitical situation, if it is a direct invasion by a foreign power, someone is likely to face a nuclear threat, and I do not want to be around when it happens. Story 78. I wouldn't try to avoid it. If we went to war, it would be Russia invading Finland, and I would fight. Story 79. I could probably maneuver myself into logistics instead of being on the front line given my job expertise, if that counts as getting out of it. Story 80. My German professor told me that she knew a man who ate a pound of butter the night before his physical examination for government service, and his cholesterol was so high that they wouldn't let him serve in the military, so he got a nice office job instead. Story 81. My health issues and body dysfunction prevent me from functioning normally. If they come down to me, we are in serious trouble. Story 82. My country, right or wrong, my country. Why would you even want to leave it? Cowardice? How could you live with that? It's inconvenient for you, but it's also inconvenient for the person who has to take your place. I know it's anecdotal, but I have never, in my later life, heard someone say they are glad they were able to avoid the draft during the Vietnam War, especially when in the company of veterans. They make excuses, saying they had a draft number but were never called, and so on. There are many individuals I know who never served that I like, but I respect none of them and call none of them friends. If they abandoned their country's needs, they would abandon a friendship twice as fast. Story 83. Getting out of a war for your country, how unpatriotic is that? Your country wants you and you say no? Believe me when I say I would definitely jump in and serve my country, but unfortunately, I am too overweight and have a range of health issues that need care. Sorry, conscription officers. This was sarcasm if you missed it. Story 84. I would tell them I am almost 74 years old. I was born in 1951. Alternatively, I could have my doctor confirm that I have bone spurs, as that seems to work. Story 85. I am almost 50 years old. I am overweight. I have diabetes. I have a disability. I am partially blind. I am legally exempt from the draft as a practicing Mennonite. All of the above statements are true. Story 86. I'm transgender. They wouldn't let me near boot camp because they were too afraid the others might catch the woke mindset. Story 87. Why avoid it? I have already been once. It is paying work and might even provide me with training that I can leverage for an even better job in the civilian world this time around. Story 88. Most young people couldn't pass the physical exam in this day and age. Testosterone levels are 30% lower than they were a generation or two ago. All these microplastics. Story 89. I have many faulty joints that would make me undesirable. I also have bad lungs and a significant amount of mental illness. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.